Okay, so first off, there's quite a few video tutorials that I've basically put up on the website. I've also had a look through Unreal's documentation, and I've provided a link to it, or at least I thought I provided a link to it. So the first thing you have to establish before you do anything, and not to waste your time, is to make sure that you look at the end shader and the textures you need for the end shader, because they are very, very different depending on which system you go with. I'm just going to go with Unreal System because that's, I'm going to assume, the end product that most people are going for. So the key thing is that you need to generate a bunch of maps. And so really the start of this was, well, I need to generate a bunch of hair strands. And I looked at ZBrush, and I looked at 3D Coat, and I looked at Max, and I went, yeah, okay, but they can't all do everything, which was really frustrating. Again, I got some good results in 3D Coat, and I will probably show you a little bit about how 3D Coat works. It's nice, intuitive, it's very quick, it's very easy. However, when I went and looked at the shaders and what the texture output's supposed to be, I couldn't get it to generate the texture outputs. So, okay, so let's look at which texture outputs we need to be put into the shader. And again, the easiest way to do this is not to bumble about in the dark, which is what I did initially, but to go and read through the documentation and make sure that you understand what they're asking for. Because the shader actually in Unreal was a little bit obscure, because normally I just bash it out and plug stuff in and it works. Hair Shader doesn't work like that, and actually when I started reading through the tutorials and the documentation, they literally say, yeah, unless you start with the material setup we already have, you've got no hope in hell of making any adjustments. So basically what they're saying is, don't go and make your own textures and just plug them in. You need to be incrementally working. Okay, so the key thing is that we need to establish which textures. So the first one is kind of obvious. It's an alpha texture. I've made sure that this isn't necessarily how I'd recommend you do the actual texture. This is just to make sure that the textures are nice and clear and readable. When you come to do an actual alpha texture, make sure that it's reasonably solid in the middle and that you have the flyaways to the edge, and that will give you much, much better performance. If your alpha looks like this, you'll get way too much overdraw. The other thing that I recommend is that you do some rendering testing, and you make sure that you're rendering at about 4 pixels per strand. So in other words, render 1 strand of hair, and if you can't see it, your overall texture is going to be way too noisy. And if you render 1 strand of hair and it's fatter than 4 pixels, you're not going to get anything that looks clean enough, because in other words your hair card will be really thin, and then again you'll get the same kind of texture resolution problem. And again, I accept that there are many, many variables in this, but a good place to start from my research is render at 4 pixels per strand, and we're rendering at twice the resolution, which means when it comes to the output file that goes eventually into Unreal, you're looking at a hair strand that's about 2 pixels wide. Anything less than that and the textures start to get very noisy. Okay, so this is my alpha. That should be fairly obvious. It's a black and white image. It will be grey at the edges. Next we have root. And root basically is a grayscale image again. It's black at the hair that is nearest the scalp, and it is white at the hair that is furthest from the scalp. Maybe you can't appreciate it, but it isn't just a grayscale from top to bottom. In other words, each strand, and you may be able to see the variance slightly, each strand has a different gradient. And that's important to get subtle variations in the piece. if you just take your opacity map and gradient fill it, you don't get anywhere near the nuance of the results. So one of the things you have to be able to extract from your from whatever it is you're creating your hair, you need to be able to extract this gradient. The next one is depth or height. Basically the idea is that you render on a grey, that black is further in from the plane, in other words back through the normal, white is up from the plane, in other words it's higher than the plane. And again, it's not just the fact that it's a depth map, because in the shader this pixel depth offset is used to give the hair volume on the actual plane. And again, you need to be very careful how this gets rendered out, because if you use different tool sets, you have to make sure that you're working in either 8-bit or 16-bit or 32-bit in that channel so that you get the right results. In other words, make sure that you're rendering in the right format in order to get the right result. And if not, you need to be able to convert it. And then the next one is unique object ID, which basically means a unique color or tone for every single hair strand as well. And again, this can be quite tricky to generate. What I managed to do in Max was to actually write a script that did it for me, because you need either a lot of materials, and again, it's very difficult to get this to work in programs like ZBrush or 3D Coat, where it doesn't even understand that there are different strands of hair. And I've tried faking it, and it does not look anywhere near as good. So again, what you have to do in this case is on each and every strand of hair has a slightly different grayscale. And then finally, base color. And literally, I mean, even Unreal say that this can just be flat color, and you can then apply different nuances to it in the actual shader. Again, playing around with these kind of results, it was easier to generate the base color in Photoshop. In other words, I have a flat color in Photoshop, and I basically change the color based on the unique ID map. So in this case, I used a gradient map. And if you want to know more about gradient maps, then tell me and I'll show you how a gradient map works. So those are the 3 maps that I needed to generate. No, 4 maps. The alpha, the root, the depth, and the unique ID. Those are the 4 maps I needed to generate, and I could generate the base color from those maps. I didn't paint the hair. And ultimately the way I did this was I used 3ds Max. As I say, in Coat and in ZBrush, they've got some very nice tools for generating hair, but I couldn't find a way of rendering out unique IDs or the root gradient. And the way that I've managed to do this in Max is basically using the spline tool. Again, played around with Max's hair and fur tool set. Looks great, seems to do absolutely everything. Then you try and extract the material passes out, and you fall flat on your face because it can't do it. So it's a real shame. So what I've ended up doing is basically having this. I've put this Max file on the Sol page because it's quite neat to be able to play around with it. The way it works is I have a single hair strand that is going to be a spline. I've not turned on the rendering option for this, because if you turn it on and then make multiple copies of it, once you get up to about 100 hairs, Max starts to really struggle. So don't turn it on in the viewport. And then what I've done is I've built a tool set. So I have these hairs, and basically I have a stack on top which can control the hairs. So this line basically is an instance of this line, and it's an instance because it means that I can make adjustments to this line and they will go across to the others. So for instance, if I go in and select these ends, ha! It's broken. That was my worst fear. Okay, I'm going to ignore that. I hope the rest of it hasn't broken as well. Problem with this is I did it in a different version of Max, and I thought, I wonder if I load this into 2019, it's going to break. Let's see if this broke as well then. Yep, everything's broken.
Typical.
Damn it. Well, that's okay, because that gives me an opportunity to go through the process, which I was going to do anyway. But before I go through the process, let me go through the texturing process. So I have a whole bunch of strands of hair. Let's just skip to that bit, and I will come back to that, because building the strands of hair is not particularly interesting. What is interesting is you basically have yourself your plane, which has got the UV coordinates on it, and I have a load of geometry that I want to render out. And let's go through and see how well this can actually work. So let's first of all, let's get rid of the projection. Because the first catch you have is you need to build up a projection. And let me go to my rendering. Render to texture. Where have you gone? I'm not going to type 0. There you are. Right. So these are the textures that I'm rendering out. Normal map, that's a kind of given. Maybe I should have shown my normal map. Did I not show the normal map? Don't think I did. Not that one. Let me just check. Okay, need to put the normal map up there as well. I will bake one of them. So I have a normal map, a diffuse map, a height map, and an alpha map. The alpha map gives me the alpha map. The height map gives me the depth map. The normal map obviously gives me a normal map. And the diffuse map I've used to derive the other two maps, both the gradient map and the material map. So what I need to do is, first of all, I need to make sure that this plane is rendering all of these hairs. So to do this, you go into projection and you pick from list, and I pick not the first hair because that one's off to the side. I pick all the hairs, and that just means that Max knows that that's what it's got to render when it goes to do the render to texture. So let's have a quick look at the materials. Hopefully these have loaded in. Right, okay, that looks good. So I'm just going to assign this material to all the hair strands so that we will see it in the render. And I'm just going to move a couple of hairs around just so that we can make sure that we clearly see what's going on. So this material has a simple map on the diffuse, and it has a self-illumination of 100%. So in other words, no lighting. And in this map, there is a gradient. So it's on the explicit map channel, and it is just a black to white gradient. I've actually had to swap it over because you make sure that black is root, otherwise you get the wrong results. So when you generate the line, if I go over to here, line, you need to make sure that when it is generated, it has UVs. There it is, generate mapping coordinates. Those mapping coordinates will go, will fill the UV space. So that means that that gradient will then go from black right at the top to white right down the bottom. So that's the easy one. So let's go and do a render to texture. Oh dear, it looks like it's slightly broke. There we go. And I've got my resolution quite low down because we want to see what it's actually doing. Obviously, don't render at anything less than about 2K. Yes, do it all. Do it all. Oh, it can't find the path. I will reset the path. This PC downloads. New folder. For some reason the only folder we can get to is the downloads folder. Great. Right. The other thing that I must remember is to make sure that background is completely black, and make sure that under options, under misray check, you get rid of the misray check. Otherwise it ruins your color scheme. It paints red over your normal maps and things like that. Right, hopefully now it will go away and render. Why is it still rendering to the wrong place? That's right. Render. Render, 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 render. Okay, so remember that the image that it displays is just a preview. You need to go into the folder and check out what it's actually done. So, what is it? Afterwards? No, Photoshop. Open it with Photoshop. Okay. Dumpty 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 dum. Okay, no, we don't want a lazy mouse either. Okay, alpha. Come on, Photoshop. When you're ready. Oh dear. Oh dear. Thank you. Right, when you're ready. Right, okay. The alpha, no surprises there. It's a black and white image, or rather, strictly speaking, it's a grayscale image. Black is transparent, white is opaque, grey is in between. This is our diffuse map, which in this case is our root map. So it's dark at the top and it's white at the bottom. And it will be different for different strands of hair. So if I go and move, needed to move more than one, clearly. If I go and move a bunch of them. Doesn't look any different. Let's try that again. There we go. And in Photoshop, there you can see different strands have a different grey scale on them. So this is the key thing, is that each strand of hair has to have its own distinct grey scale from the root to the tip. Because as they bend around, those grey scales will be in different places, which is why you can't just do this in Photoshop. There's the height map. That's fairly straightforward. Get rid of the pixel grid. Show pixel grid. So dark are hairs that are below the plane and white is hairs that are above the plane, apparently. That is in appearance, not in actual. And then normal map, as you would expect. There's our normal map. Okay. Oh, I didn't want to close it, but there we are. So then we needed to generate unique material IDs for each object. And this one was a pain, but in the end, the quickest solution is a script. So rather than boring you with the practicalities of it, basically you go down here and you copy this script. And let's pop back into 3ds Max and go to scripting, new script. I'm just going to paste this in, and what this does is it assigns a new material to every single object that you have selected, and then gives that material a random color. So I can go in and select, that was too much, select all my hairs. So if I run this script, what it does is it generates the code. And then what I can do is I can either use the listener and type in material ID, and it will, material ID, that's the function. Did it run? Or has it hung up? Come on. Right, there we go then. And it will go away, and it will generate a new material for each and every hair, and that new material will be self-illuminated and have a different color. And when it responds, and it's crashed and died. No, it's worked. So much fun, so exciting. Okay, let's have a quick look at what it's actually gone and done, just out of interest. So if I open up the materials editor and I click on one that's not used and I just grab a hair, you can see it's got a bright red, and if I go and click on another one, well, the chances of me clicking on the same one, there we go, that one's blue. So basically he's gone and coloured all the objects with a unique colour. So now if I go away and I select my plane and do another render, weirdly that doesn't look any different. Why doesn't that look any different? Let's just check Photoshop again. Oh, that's why that's got in there. What's that doing there? That can go away. No, you did it again. I'm gonna teach you. Don't do that. I've obviously got it ticked. That's better. They're not in colour. I'm expecting them to be in colour. Let's check with Photoshop. That diffuse map doesn't look like it's in colour. Why is it not in colour? That's not right. Okay, materials. That's your material. What's your material? What's your material? They are definitely all different colours. Let's render it from this view. Well, that doesn't tell me a lot. Let's render it from there. And yet they're in black and white. That's peculiar and definitely not useful, because they should definitely be in colour. Why are they not in colour? In fact, interestingly, why is that not in colour? That one's in colour. That one's not in colour. Let's put that material on those hairs. Let's render it. They're in colour. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the material on here. Going to make sure that they all render. Going to wait for Max to respond. It's not going to crash. It's okay. It's not going to crash. Render. Okay, they're definitely blue. Let's open up the script again. Wow, this takes so much longer. Going to be very disappointed if this doesn't work. Yay, that works. Okay then, that was just weird. So now if I go back and go to my projection, and this time I go and do a render. Yay, I now get all the colours. So basically what an ID render is as you can probably see, each individual hair strand is a different colour. You can, for some software shaders, you can leave it like this. For Unreal, they actually want a grayscale for the way they set up their shader. Okay, so one of the features, let's just go and hide this, of this setup is that once I got the splines working, I was able to go and put some features in. So I'm just gonna back up a bit and get rid of that scale. No, I'm gonna reload it. That'll be quicker. Open. It is very clear that there is a dearth of tools out there for doing this particular job, which just shows you how cutting edge doing hair work is. So what I did after I figured out how to do these strands and how I'd managed to get them working in the way that I wanted them to, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to modify the whole lot of strands together as a bunch. So I've got some twist and taper modifiers on here. So what they allow me to do is it allows me... Oh, it's broken that connection as well. That's good. No, that's okay. That's fine. I will do it. I will do it the long way. Going to do it the long way anyway. Okay. So, I have a hair strand. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an instance of that hair strand. And what that permits me to do is it means that anything I do to this hair strand will happen to this one. And let's just see if this works this time. There we go. So I have a very coarse way of manipulating every single hair strand. If I want short hairs or long hairs, or I want to manipulate all the bunch in one go, I can do this. So the next thing I want to do is, obviously I want to have another copy of this hair strand. The trouble is that I don't want it to be exactly the same as the one that I've just made. So the way to do this is to add a modifier to this, and then to make sure that that modifier reciprocates across the others. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to modifiers, and I'm going to add myself a noise modifier, and I'm going to change the, I think I'll keep the X at 0 and the Y and the Z up. And once I can see it doing something, I can then decide, so there's my Y-axis, which is my shift, and that's my Z-axis, which is my in-out, I believe. That should be right. Z is in and out. Y is left and right. So, with this tool, what I can do is, depending on the seed, I will get different effects, which is exactly what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this hair strand. I'm going to get rid of that noise modifier. I'm going to drag this over. This time I'm going to make this a reference. And what a reference enables me to do is it will copy the object but not copy the stack that goes above the object. And then I've got my line selected, so I can go back and I can add my noise modifier. So I'm going to change my Y and Z values, and I'm going to change the scale a bit. And now you can see that every time I change the seed, I get a slight variation in that hair. So this is really useful. Now if I shift drag this, I'm going to keep it on reference, I get another hair, and again it's got the noise modifier, and if I change, that's not right. If I change the noise modifier, I get a different result. Now that's fine, and again if I go in and do another one, I'll make sure those are set to unique. I can change my noise modifier again. Now if you've got 200 or 300 hair strands, you don't want to be changing the noise modifier each and every single time. That would get very tedious. So I'm going to use a unique feature that I think that, well, it seems to be unique in Max, is I'm actually going to wire the noise position, the noise value to the position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to go to wire parameters, modified object, noise, seed. And then I'm going to wire it to the same object's position Y. And it comes up with this dialog, so I'm going to wire from position to seed, which is that way, and connect it. And now what happens is every time I move it on the Y axis, it changes the seed, and therefore it changes the shape. So this is really, really, really useful, because obviously what happens now is wherever I go and put this, notice if I move it on the X, it doesn't do anything. It's just on the Y axis. So now when I make multiple copies of this and move things around, did it break? Oh, that must be an extra feature that they put in the new version. On the old version, that worked fine. Let's just try that again, see if it has to be a copy. That works. Let's make it a copy then. Yeah, that still works. So now I should be able to select a whole bunch of hairs. They all look the same. Why are they the same? Oh no, they're not the same. That's a relief. They look very similar. Well, they are different. Right. So this allows me to build up a clump of hair. And then what you can do is, once you've got your group of hair, what's useful is that you can give them a common modifier. So in other words, two of the useful ones are the taper modifier. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that my gizmo's at the top. Not my gizmo, my center is at the top. So this allows me to control the hair spread, so I can form it into a taper. And the other one that's quite useful is to go in and do a twist, which gives you some really nice effects. Again, I've got to make sure that my center's high up, and then when you go in and twist it, you can get some nice soft curl hair.
Oh, that's really cool.
It is. And of course, when we go in and do the render, and let's go pick from list. And let's set up our render to texture. That's okay. That's okay. Let's just make sure that our existing channel is on. Let's not get caught out twice. And then if I go into Photoshop and open up the height map again. File, revert. We get nice twisting hair strands, which is really hard to do in other bits of software. So clearly there are insufficient tools. What you can do in Max is pretty powerful once you can hack your way through it. If you are doing hair, then I suggest you play around with this Max file and then come up with a list of things that you want it to do, because it's quite clear that if we had a nice tool set, it would make the pipeline so much easier. Are there any questions? No, you will understand it perfectly. It's so easy. Yes?
I was just wondering a bit about the explicit map channel. What's that?
The explicit map channel. How do you mean? So this, when I'm rendering to texture.
If you go back into materials, you told us how to set everything up, and that.
So I've got a gradient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I've run a script for the other one. Which one is it, the gradient or the script?
I can't see the exact setting.
Okay, so if I look at here's the gradient. So it's a diffuse, it's got a map on the diffuse, and it's fully self-illuminated. And then inside the map, it's using a gradient.
Yeah, this is the one. I was just wondering about the mapping, explicit map channel.
So that basically just says use the UV coordinates, as opposed to you can use vertices or the object's UV space or the world UV space. You want the explicit map channel, which is the UV set, and then under map channel it picks the UV set. We normally only deal with one UV set. Okay. Any other questions? You can tell how successful you are as a lecturer by the questions asked after your presentation. And in this case, I get 3 out of 10. Most people are like, oh man, it's too difficult. Go away. Complicated.